A wrong number usually gets you a stranger's voicemail. For Maritza Gordon, it got her a sniper's crosshair and a guardian devil, trapped in a freezing warehouse with a gun pressed to her temple, waiting for a corrupt detective to decide if killing her was worth the complications. She tried to text her sister for help. Her hands were shaking too hard. She mistyped one digit. That message didn't go to her sister. It went to the encrypted line of Dante Compton, Chicago's most elusive and calculating crime lord. A number reserved for his inner circle. A number that hadn't received a wrong number text in 5 years. What happens when a nurse who saves lives accidentally calls the man who ends them? The answer is brutal, strategic, and oddly protective. This is the story of "He has a gun to my head." The smell of gunpowder is distinct. It isn't something you forget after the first time. It clings to fabric, to skin, to memory. Maritza Gordon smelled it before she processed what had happened. Then, she saw the body. The young man collapsed in the parking garage of Chicago Memorial, his face still frozen in shock, blood pooling beneath him in the fluorescent light. He'd been alive 30 seconds ago. She'd seen him walking toward his car, fumbling with his keys. Now he was gone. And standing over him, holstering his service weapon with practiced efficiency, was Detective Sidney Cobb. Maritza's breath caught in her throat. She was 20 feet away, half hidden behind a concrete pillar, her scrubs still damp from a 16-hour ER shift. She should have kept walking. She should have pretended she hadn't seen anything. But her feet were frozen. Cobb turned his head. Their eyes met. For a single, terrible moment, time stopped. Maritza saw the calculation in his expression, the cold assessment of a man weighing risks and benefits. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't afraid. He was deciding whether she was worth the trouble. "Nurse Gordon," Cobb said, his voice calm and familiar. He'd been to the hospital before. Everyone knew Detective Cobb, decorated officer, community liaison, the kind of cop who smiled for photo ops with cancer kids. "Get in the car." It wasn't a request. Maritza's body reacted before her mind could catch up. She turned to run, but Cobb closed the distance in 3 strides. His hand clamped around her upper arm with bruising force. The muzzle of his gun pressed against her spine. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't make me ruin your pretty scrubs." He walked her to his unmarked sedan, opened the back door, and shoved her inside. The child locks engaged with a click that sounded like a jail cell closing. As he drove, Maritza's mind raced through possibilities. Scream? No one would hear in this industrial district. Fight? He was armed and trained. Jump from the car? At 50 miles per hour, she'd be dead before she hit the pavement. She was a nurse. She saved people. She wasn't equipped for this. The car stopped in front of a derelict warehouse on the south side. Cobb dragged her inside, past rusted machinery and shattered windows, until they reached a small office in the back. He pushed her into a metal chair. "Here's the situation," Cobb said, leaning against the desk. His gun dangled casually from his right hand. "You witnessed something you shouldn't have. That kid was supposed to testify against some very important people tomorrow. Now he won't." Maritza's voice came out as a whisper. "You murdered him." "I solved a problem," Cobb corrected. "And now you're another problem. A loose end." He studied her like a specimen under glass. "I'm trying to decide if killing you creates more complications than it solves." Maritza's hands were shaking violently. She could feel her phone in the pocket of her scrubs, a lifeline she couldn't reach without him noticing. "I won't say anything," she said, hating how pathetic she sounded. "I promise. I'll forget I ever saw." "You're a terrible liar, Maritza." Cobb sighed and checked his watch. "I've got about 10 minutes before I need to file a report. So let's both sit here and think about our options." He turned away to look at his phone. It was now or never. Maritza slipped her hand into her pocket as slowly as she could. Her fingers found her phone. The screen was cracked from when it had fallen during her last shift, but it still worked. She couldn't look at it. She had to type blind. She knew her sister Camila's number by heart. She'd called it 1,000 times. 312-555-0198. Her thumb moved across the screen, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely control them. She felt the numbers beneath her fingertip, praying she was getting them right. Sani arwu wulingi ijo. She didn't notice the mistake. She couldn't see the screen. She just typed what felt right and added a message. "He's got a gun. To my head, please help me, warehouse South Docks." She hit send. The phone slipped from her trembling fingers and thudded softly against her thigh. Maritza kept her face neutral, forcing herself to breathe. Cobb hadn't noticed. He was still scrolling through his own phone, probably crafting an alibi. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Then, her phone vibrated. Maritza's heart stopped. Cobb's head snapped toward her. What was that? Nothing, Maritza said quickly. He crossed the room in 2 strides and yanked the phone from her pocket. His eyes scanned the screen. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. Who the hell did you text? Maritza looked at the screen. The response was from an unknown number. Unknown. Address. Now, Maritza had typed back before Cobb grabbed the phone. Old Miller Warehouse 2000, 200 seconds docks. There was another message, sent just seconds ago. Unknown. Tell him to look for the red dot on his chest. Cobb read it and frowned. What kind of... He never finished the sentence. 3 red laser dots appeared on his torso. 1 on his chest, 1 on his shoulder, 1 directly over his heart. Cobb's face went white. He spun toward the shattered windows, but there was only darkness beyond. Somewhere out there, in the skeletal remains of the industrial district, snipers had him in their sights. Who did you text? Cobb demanded, his voice cracking. Maritza stared at the dots on his chest, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. I don't know, she whispered. Cobb's hand tightened on his gun. He pointed it at Maritza's head, using her as a shield as he backed toward the door. Call them off. Tell whoever this is to stand down, or I'll... The office door didn't open. It exploded inward. The concussive force rattled the walls. Cobb stumbled backward, and before he could recover, 4 men in tactical gear flooded the room. They moved like a surgical team, silent, precise, lethal. One of them hit Cobb's wrist with a baton. The gun clattered to the floor. Another swept his legs. Cobb went down hard, his face slamming into the concrete. Secure him, a voice commanded from the doorway. Maritza looked up. Standing in the ruined doorway, framed by the distant glow of Chicago's skyline, was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a boardroom and into a war zone. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, a black tie, and an expression of absolute control. His dark eyes swept the room, taking in every detail, before landing on her. Maritza knew that face. She'd seen it in news reports, in whispered conversations at the hospital, in the kind of stories people told in low voices. Dante Compton, the architect, the man who built empires in the shadows and dismantled his enemies with surgical precision. He walked toward her, his footsteps echoing in the warehouse. Cobb was on his knees now, restrained by 2 of Dante's men, his face pressed against the floor. Dante crouched down in front of Maritza. His eyes scanned her face, then dropped to the gun that had been pointed at her moments ago. Are you hurt? His voice was low, calm, almost gentle. Maritza shook her head, unable to speak. Tears blurred her vision. Dante picked up her phone from where Cobb had dropped it. He read the message exchange, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. You texted the wrong number, he said. I'm sorry, Maritza whispered. I was trying to reach my sister. I didn't mean to. You texted a secure line that only 5 people in this city have access to. Dante's eyes locked onto hers. A line I use to protect the people who matter to me. He stood, towering over her, and extended his hand. Can you stand? Maritza nodded. She took his hand, and he pulled her to her feet with surprising gentleness. Her legs were shaking, but she forced herself to stay upright. Dante turned to his men. Get him up. They hauled Cobb to his feet. His face was bleeding, his nose likely broken. But Dante wasn't done. He walked over to Cobb and looked him in the eyes. You're a detective, Dante said. You know the rules. You know how this city works. So I need you to understand something very clearly. Dante leaned in closer. She's under my protection now. If you file a report, if you come looking for her, if you so much as think her name, you won't get a red dot. You'll just disappear. Cobb's voice was a ragged whisper. You can't do this. I'm a cop. The whole department will do exactly what I tell them to do. Dante interrupted. Because half of them are on my payroll, and the other half are too smart to cross me. He stepped back and nodded to his men. Take him to the secondary location. I want to know who he's working for and why he's executing witnesses in hospital parking garages. As they dragged Cobb away, Dante turned back to Maritza. We need to go. This area won't stay quiet for long. Maritza's mind was spinning. Where are you taking me? Somewhere safe, Dante said. He gestured toward the door. "Unless you'd rather take your chances with whoever sent him to kill that man tonight." Maritza looked at the shattered office, the blood on the floor, the red dots that had saved her life. She followed Dante Compton into the night. Outside, a convoy of black SUVs waited in the shadows. Dante opened the door to the middle vehicle and waited for her to get in. As Maritza slid into the leather seat, she caught sight of her phone screen one more time. The message was still there. Unknown. Tell him to look for the red dot on his chest. She looked up at Dante, who was sliding into the seat beside her. "Who are you?" she asked. Dante's expression didn't change. "The only person in Chicago who answered when you called for help." Maritza Gordon's shift ended at 11:47 p.m., but she didn't clock out until 12:20 a.m. That was the reality of working the ER at Chicago Memorial. The official end time meant nothing when there were still patients bleeding, crying, or coding in Trauma Bay 3. She peeled off her gloves, tossed them in the biohazard bin, and felt the exhaustion settle into her bones like wet concrete. 16 hours. 2 stabbings, 1 overdose, a cardiac arrest she'd helped bring back from the edge, and a 7-year-old with a fever who just needed his mother to hold him, while Maritza started the IV. Her scrubs were stained with coffee, saline, and someone else's blood. Her feet ached. All she wanted was her couch, a microwave burrito, and 8 hours of unconsciousness. She grabbed her jacket from her locker, slung her bag over her shoulder, and headed for the stairwell that led to the employee parking garage. The elevator was closer, but she'd learned months ago that taking the stairs meant avoiding Dr. Hendricks, who liked to corner female nurses and talk about his divorce. The stairwell echoed with her footsteps. 4 flights down, pushed through the heavy metal door, and she was in the parking garage, a fluorescent-lit tomb that smelled like exhaust and old rain. Her car was parked on the 3rd level, tucked between a rusted pickup truck and a sedan with a missing bumper. She dug her keys out of her bag, already mentally rehearsing the drive home. 10 minutes if the lights cooperated, 15 if they didn't. That's when she heard the voices. Maritza slowed, her keys jingling softly in her hand. The garage was supposed to be empty at this hour. Security made rounds, but they were lazy about it. She glanced toward the source of the sound 2 levels down, near the exit ramp. 2 men. One was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. The other was smaller, younger, his hands raised in a gesture that looked like pleading. Maritza's instincts told her to keep walking. Mind your business, get in your car, go home. But the smaller man's voice cracked, and she heard it clearly in the cavernous space. "Please, I have a daughter. She's 3. Please, I'll disappear. I won't testify. I swear to God I won't." The taller man's response was calm, almost bored. "It's nothing personal, Luis." Maritza's breath caught. She knew that voice. She'd heard it before, smooth and authoritative, the kind of voice that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. Detective Sidney Cobb. She'd seen him at the hospital a dozen times, always professional, always courteous. He brought donuts for the nurses during the holidays. He'd once helped her carry supplies from her car when her hands were full. Luis took a step backward, his voice rising in desperation. "I have money. I can pay you. Whatever they're paying you. I'll double it, triple it. Just let me." The gunshot was deafening. Maritza's keys slipped from her hand and hit the concrete with a metallic clang that seemed to echo forever. Luis crumpled. His body folded in on itself, graceless and final, and the pool of blood began spreading beneath him almost immediately. The fluorescent lights made it look black instead of red. Cobb holstered his weapon with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He didn't check for a pulse. He didn't hesitate. And then he turned his head. Maritza was 20 feet away, standing in the open like an idiot, her keys glittering on the ground beside her feet. She couldn't move. Her body had locked up, every muscle frozen in shock. Cobb's eyes met hers. For one terrible second, she saw him calculate. His hand didn't move toward his gun. His expression didn't change. He just looked at her the way a mechanic might look at a car with a check engine light assessing the problem, considering the solution. Then he smiled. It was the same smile he used when he brought those holiday donuts. Warm, familiar, friendly. "Nurse Gordon," he said, his voice carrying across the garage. "Working late again." Maritza's legs finally obeyed. She turned and ran. She made it 3 steps before she heard his footsteps behind her, fast, purposeful, closing the distance. She lunged for the stairwell door, but his hand caught her arm and yanked her backward with enough force to knock the air from her lungs. the cold muzzle of his gun pressed against her spine. "Don't," Cobb said quietly. His breath was warm against her ear. "Don't make me ruin your pretty scrubs." Maritza's vision swam. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Cobb's grip tightened, and he walked her toward his unmarked sedan, past Luis's body, past the spreading pool of blood that she would see every time she closed her eyes for the rest of her life. "Get in the car, Maritza," Cobb said. He opened the back door. "We need to have a conversation." She got in. The child locks engaged with a sound like a cell door slamming shut. The drive lasted 12 minutes. Maritza counted every second, watching the city lights blur past the window as Cobb drove south, away from the hospital, away from anything familiar. He didn't speak, didn't turn on the radio, just drove with the calm focus of a man running an errand. Maritza's hands were trembling in her lap. She kept thinking about Luis, the way his voice had cracked when he mentioned his daughter, the way his body had folded, the absolute finality of it. She pressed her palms against her thighs to stop the shaking, but it didn't help. The car slowed and turned into an industrial district she didn't recognize. Abandoned factories lined the street, their windows shattered, their walls covered in graffiti. This was the part of Chicago that the tourism board pretended didn't exist. Cobb pulled up to a massive warehouse with a rusted sign that read, "Miller & Sons Manufacturing." The building looked like it had been dead for decades. He killed the engine and got out. Maritza heard the back door unlock. "Out," Cobb said. She climbed out on shaking legs. The night air was cold, carrying the smell of rust and stagnant water. Cobb's hand closed around her upper arm, and he walked her toward a side entrance. The door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, the warehouse was a graveyard of broken machinery and rotted pallets. Their footsteps echoed in the cavernous space. Cobb led her to a small office in the back 4 walls. A metal desk, a single chair. He pushed her into the chair and leaned against the desk, his gun dangling casually from his right hand. "Here's the situation," Cobb said, his tone conversational. "You witnessed something you shouldn't have. Luis Reyes was scheduled to testify tomorrow against the Calabrese family. Now he won't." Maritza's voice came out as a whisper. "You killed him. I solved a problem." Cobb studied her like she was a specimen under glass. "And now you're a problem. A loose end." He checked his watch. "I've got about 10 minutes before I need to file a report, so we're both going to sit here and think about our options." He turned away to look at his phone, scrolling through something with his thumb. Maritza's heart was hammering against her ribs. She could feel her phone in the pocket of her scrubs, a lifeline she couldn't reach without him noticing. But he wasn't looking at her. He was distracted. It was now or never. She slipped her hand into her pocket as slowly as she could, praying the fabric wouldn't rustle. Her fingers found her phone. The screen was cracked from when she'd dropped it last week, but it still worked. She couldn't look at it. She had to type blind. Camila's number. She'd called it 1,000 times. 312-555-0198. Her thumb moved across the screen, but her hands were shaking so violently she could barely control them. She felt for the numbers, pressing where she thought they should be. Sen er wu 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 ling I zio. She didn't notice the mistake. She couldn't see the screen. Terror had narrowed her world to the feeling of glass beneath her fingertip and the sound of Cobb's breathing across the room. She typed quickly, grammatically broken, desperate. "He's got a gun. To my head, please help me, warehouse South Docks." She hit send. The phone slipped from her trembling fingers and thudded softly against her thigh. Maritza kept her face neutral, forcing herself to breathe normally. Cobb was still scrolling through his phone, probably crafting an alibi for Luis's murder. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Then her phone vibrated. The sound was barely audible, but in the silence of the warehouse office, it might as well have been a gunshot. Cobb's head snapped toward her. "What was that?" "Nothing," Maritza said quickly, but her voice cracked. He crossed the room in 2 strides and yanked the phone from her pocket. His eyes scanned the screen, and his expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. "Who the hell did you text?" Maritza looked at the screen over his shoulder. The response was from an unknown number. Unknown. Address. Now. Her own reply was already there. She must have typed it automatically in her panic. Old Miller Warehouse, 2000, 200 seconds docks. Another message appeared as they both stared at the screen. Unknown. Tell him to look for the red dot on his chest. Cobb read it twice, frowning. What kind of... He never finished the sentence. 3 red laser dots appeared on his chest. 1 over his heart, 1 on his shoulder, 1 in the center of his sternum. The color drained from Cobb's face. He spun toward the shattered windows, but there was only darkness beyond. Somewhere out there, in the skeletal ruins of the industrial district, snipers had him in their sights. Who did you text? Cobb's voice cracked. Who the hell did you text? Maritza stared at the red dots dancing on his chest, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. I don't know, she whispered. And she didn't. Dante Compton was reviewing quarterly projections when his secure phone vibrated on the mahogany desk. The phone was a relic, a modified burner that only 5 people in Chicago had the number to. His head of security, his financial advisor, his attorney, his second-in-command, and his sister, though she'd been dead for 3 years. He'd kept the line active anyway. Grief had peculiar rituals. The projection spreadsheet could wait. Dante picked up the phone, expecting a report from Marcus about the shipment coming through the port. Instead, he saw an unknown number. That was impossible. The encryption on this line was military grade. Random civilians didn't accidentally stumble onto it. This number didn't exist in any database, any contact list, any leaked document. He opened the message. He's got a gun. 2. My head, please. Help me, Warehouse South Docks. Dante read it 3 times. The grammar was broken, the typing frantic. This wasn't a coded message from an associate. This was genuine terror. Someone had misdialed catastrophically and sent a cry for help to the most dangerous number in Chicago. He looked at the timestamp. Sent 45 seconds ago. South Docks. That was his territory. The abandoned industrial zone, where the Calabrese family used to run their smuggling operations before Dante had systematically dismantled their infrastructure. The area was a wasteland now, rusted warehouses, forgotten streets, no witnesses. Perfect place for a murder. Dante stood and crossed to the floor, to ceiling windows of his penthouse office. Lake Michigan stretched out before him, black and endless under the night sky. Somewhere out there, someone was about to die unless he intervened. He should delete the message. This wasn't his problem. Wrong numbers weren't distress signals from the universe. But something stopped him. Bless, help me. He thought of his sister Sophia. The night she'd called him, terrified, begging him to come get her from a party that had turned dangerous. He'd been in a meeting. He'd told her to call an Uber. He'd told her he'd see her in the morning. She never made it home. Dante's jaw tightened. He typed a response. Address. Now. The reply came within seconds. Old Miller Warehouse. 2,200 Seconds Docks. He knew the building. It was one of the few structures in that district, still semi-intact, isolated, surrounded by empty lots, no security cameras within 3 blocks. Whoever had this person had chosen their killing ground carefully. Dante pressed the intercom button on his desk. Matteo, assemble a team, full tactical, we're moving now. His head of security's voice crackled back immediately. Target? Miller Warehouse, South Side. Possible hostage situation. I want sniper positions on every approach, and a breach team ready in 4 minutes. Copy that. Dante slipped the phone into his pocket and grabbed his suit jacket from the back of his chair. He was halfway to the door when he paused and pulled the phone back out. He typed one more message. Short. Direct. The kind of message that made people understand exactly who they were dealing with. Tell him to look for the red dot on his chest. He hit send and walked out of his office. The elevator descended 47 floors in smooth silence. By the time Dante reached the underground parking garage, 3 black SUVs were already idling, their engines purring like predators. Matteo stood beside the middle vehicle, tactical vest already strapped on, earpiece in place. Sniper teams are mobilizing, Matteo said as Dante approached. ETA to the warehouse is 6 minutes. What are we walking into? Unknown hostage. Unknown hostile, Dante said, sliding into the back seat. Assume the hostile is armed and willing to execute. Rules of engagement disable, don't kill. I want to know who's operating in my territory without permission. Matteo nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. The convoy rolled out, moving through the late-night streets with precision. Dante looked at his phone one more time. No new messages. Whoever had texted him was either too terrified to respond or already dead. He hoped it was the former. The SUVs cut through the city, bypassing traffic lights with the kind of authority that came from owning half the municipal infrastructure. They reached the industrial district in 5 minutes. Mateo's earpiece crackled. Overwatch 1 in position. We have visual on the warehouse. Single vehicle outside, unmarked sedan, municipal plates. Dante's eyes narrowed. Municipal plates. That meant either a government worker or a cop. Overwatch 2 in position, another voice reported. Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures in the northwest office. One seated, one standing. Standing figure is armed. Lock onto the armed figure, Dante ordered. 3 points of coverage. If he moves toward the hostage, you have green light to disable. Copy. The SUVs stopped 2 blocks from the warehouse. Engines cutting simultaneously. Dante stepped out into the cold night air. Mateo and 4 other operators flanking him. His phone buzzed. He looked down. The unknown number had sent another message not to him, but visible in the thread because it had been sent to the same group. Is got a gun dos? My head plus help me. It was a repeat. A desperate, panicked repeat. Whoever this was, they thought the message hadn't gone through. Dante slipped the phone into his pocket. Move, he said. The team advanced in silence. Before we continue with what happens next, if you're following Maritza's journey, let us know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever witnessed something you knew you couldn't stay silent about? Have you ever had to choose between your safety or exposing the truth? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is just getting started, and what happens when Dante reaches that warehouse will leave you absolutely speechless. We share stories about the courage it takes to stand up to corruption, the strength to survive impossible situations, and the moments when the right stranger shows up at exactly the right time. Comment red dot below if you believe in fighting back against those who abuse their power. The office door didn't open. It exploded inward. The concussive force rattled the metal desk and sent splinters of wood flying through the air. Maritza threw her hands up to shield her face, her ears ringing from the blast. Cobb stumbled backward, his gun swinging wildly between the door and Maritza. The red laser dots tracked his movement with predatory precision, never leaving his chest. 4 men flooded through the doorway, moving with the synchronized efficiency of a military strike team. They wore tactical gear, black vests, helmets, rifles held at the ready, but no insignia, no badges, nothing to identify them. The lead operator closed the distance to Cobb in 3 strides. Before Cobb could aim his weapon, the operator swung a collapsible baton and struck his wrist with surgical precision. The crack of bone was audible even over Maritza's ragged breathing. Cobb's gun clattered to the concrete floor. He tried to dive for it, but another operator swept his legs. Cobb went down hard, his face slamming into the ground. Blood sprayed from his nose. Secure him, a voice commanded from the doorway. Maritza looked up through the haze of adrenaline and fear. Standing in the ruined doorway, framed by darkness and the distant glow of the city, was a man who didn't belong in a place like this. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Maritza's annual salary, a black tie perfectly knotted, and an expression of absolute control. His dark eyes swept the room, taking in Cobb on the ground, the 2 operators restraining him, and finally, Maritza. She knew that face. Everyone in Chicago knew that face, even if they'd only seen it in grainy news footage or whispered rumors. Dante Compton, the architect, the man who built criminal empires in shadow and dismantled his enemies with surgical precision. He crossed the room in measured steps, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete. Behind him, 2 more operators flanked the doorway, their rifles trained on Cobb. Dante stopped in front of Maritza's chair. His gaze moved from her face to her blood-stained scrubs, then to the discarded gun on the floor. Are you hurt? His voice was low, calm, almost gentle. Maritza shook her head. Words wouldn't come. Her throat was too tight, her mind still trying to process the explosion, the violence, the fact that she was somehow still alive. Dante crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with her. He picked up her phone from where Cobb had dropped it on the desk. He read the message exchange, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. You texted the wrong number, he said. I'm sorry. Maritza's voice came out as a whisper. I was trying to reach my sister. I didn't mean to. You texted a secure line that only 5 people in this city have access to. Dante's eyes locked onto hers. They were dark, unreadable, but not unkind. A line I used to protect the people who matter to me. Behind them, Cobb groaned. One of the operators hauled him to his knees, wrenching his arms behind his back. Blood dripped from his broken nose onto his shirt. Dante stood and extended his hand to Maritza. "Can you stand?" She nodded and took his hand. His grip was firm, steady, and he pulled her to her feet with surprising gentleness. Her legs were shaking, but she forced herself to stay upright. Dante turned to his team. "Get him up." They hauled Cobb to his feet. His face was a mess, nose clearly broken, one eye already swelling shut, but there was still defiance in his expression, the arrogance of a man who believed his badge made him untouchable. Dante walked over to him slowly, deliberately. He studied Cobb the way an entomologist might study a pinned insect. "Detective Sidney Cobb," Dante said. "Decorated officer. 15 years with Chicago PD, community liaison, coach for the youth basketball league." He paused, and apparently a cleaner for the Calabrese family. Cobb's good eye widened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Luis Reyes," Dante continued, his voice never rising above conversational. "Scheduled to testify tomorrow morning about the Calabrese drug operation on the north side. He was murdered approximately 40 minutes ago in the parking garage of Chicago Memorial Hospital. Single gunshot to the chest. Execution style." Cobb said nothing. The defiance in his face was cracking, replaced by something closer to fear. "This woman witnessed it," Dante said, gesturing to Maritza without looking away from Cobb. "Which is why you brought her here. To decide if killing a nurse was worth the complications." "She's lying," Cobb spat. "She's unstable. Mental health issues. I was trying to help her when you—" Dante held up a hand, silencing him. He reached into Cobb's jacket and pulled out his badge, then his wallet. He examined the badge for a moment, before tossing both into a puddle of oily water near the wall. "You're not a cop tonight, detective. Tonight, you're just a man who murders witnesses for money." Dante leaned in closer. "And you made a critical mistake. You did it in my territory." He stepped back and nodded to Matteo. "Take him to the secondary location. I want to know who hired him, how long he's been working for the Calabrese family, and who else in the department is on their payroll." Dante's voice was cold and clinical. "Use whatever methods are necessary. Just keep him breathing, for now." "Copy," Matteo said. The team began moving Cobb toward the door. Cobb struggled against their grip, panic finally overtaking arrogance. "You can't do this. I have a radio. They know I'm here. The whole department will." "The whole department will do exactly what I tell them to do," Dante interrupted. "Because half of them are on my payroll, and the other half are too smart to cross me." As they dragged Cobb into the darkness of the warehouse, his protests echoing and fading, Dante turned back to Maritza. "We need to leave. This area won't stay quiet for long." Maritza's mind was spinning. "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere safe." Dante gestured toward the door. "Unless you'd rather take your chances with whoever sent him to kill Luis Reyes tonight." Maritza looked at the shattered office, the blood on the floor, the red dots that had saved her life. She followed Dante Compton into the night. Maritza woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the distant sound of waves against a shoreline. For a disorienting moment, she didn't remember where she was. The bed beneath her was too soft, the sheets too expensive, the ceiling too high. Then the memories crashed back Luis's body, Cobb's gun, the red laser dots. Dante Compton's dark eyes studying her in that shattered warehouse office. She sat up too quickly, and her vision swam. The room was massive, decorated in shades of cream and steel gray. Modern art hung on the walls. A glass door led to a private balcony overlooking Lake Michigan, the water stretching endlessly toward the horizon. This wasn't a safe house. This was a fortress disguised as luxury. She was still wearing her scrubs, though someone had removed her shoes and covered her with a cashmere throw. Her phone sat on the nightstand, plugged into a charger she didn't recognize. Maritza swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood on shaky legs. The door to the bedroom was closed but not locked. She opened it slowly, stepping into a hallway lined with more art and recessed lighting. Voices drifted from somewhere nearby. She followed them. The hallway opened into a massive living space, all glass and steel, with furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. Dante stood near the windows, dressed in a different suit than last night, this one navy with a silver tie. He was speaking quietly to Matteo, who still wore his tactical vest. Dante noticed her first. He turned, his expression unreadable. "You're awake," he said. "How do you feel?" "Confused," Maritza managed. Her voice was hoarse. Where am I? My penthouse. 47th floor. Dante gestured to a chair near the windows. Sit. You need to eat something. Maritza didn't move. I need to go home. I need to call my sister. I need to... You can't go home, Dante interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. Detective Cobb filed a report 3 hours ago claiming you were kidnapped by unknown assailants. There's an APB out for you. Every cop in Chicago is looking for the missing nurse who witnessed a murder. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Mateo stepped forward, holding a tablet. He turned it toward her, showing a news article. The headline read, Chicago nurse missing after alleged kidnapping detective injured in rescue attempt. Maritza's legs gave out. She sank into the nearest chair, staring at the screen. There was a photo of her hospital ID badge picture, next to a photo of Cobb with a bandaged nose and a theatrical sling on his arm. He's claiming he tried to save you, Dante said. That you were abducted from the hospital parking garage by armed men. That he tracked you to the warehouse and was injured attempting a rescue. That's insane, Maritza whispered. He killed Luis. He was going to kill me. I know. Dante sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. But he's a decorated detective with 15 years of service, and you're a civilian with no proof. If you walk into a police station right now, you'll be arrested as a material witness. They'll put you in protective custody, which means a cell, and Detective Cobb has friends in every precinct in this city. Maritza's hands were shaking again. So what am I supposed to do? Stay here, Dante said simply. You're safe in this building. No one gets past my security without my permission. Not Cobb, not the Calabrese family, not anyone. The Calabrese family? Maritza looked up sharply. What do they have to do with this? Dante exchanged a glance with Mateo before answering. Luis Reyes was going to testify against them. Detective Cobb has been eliminating their problems for at least 3 years. We've suspected it, but we've never had a living witness with credibility. He paused. Until now. You're saying he's done this before? Horror crept into Maritza's voice. He's murdered other people? 7 that we know of, Dante said. All listed as suicides, accidental deaths, or unsolved missing persons cases. Cobb is careful. He doesn't leave evidence. He doesn't make mistakes. His eyes darkened. But he made one last night. He let you live long enough to text that number. Maritza felt nauseous. She thought about Cobb bringing donuts to the nurse's station, smiling at everyone, playing the role of the good cop. How many people had he killed while wearing that same friendly smile? I can't stay here, she said, even though her voice lacked conviction. I have a life, a job, a sister who's probably terrified right now. Your sister already received a text from your phone, Mateo said. We sent it this morning. It says you're safe, and that you'll explain everything soon. Maritza stared at him. You took my phone? We secured your phone, Dante corrected. And yes, we monitored your messages to make sure no one tracking you could use them to find this location. He stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the lake. I understand. This isn't what you wanted. But right now, Maritza, you have 2 choices. Stay here under my protection, or walk out that door and become another one of Cobb's victims within 48 hours. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Maritza spoke. What do you want from me? Dante turned to face her. The truth. Everything you saw. Everything you know. And when the time comes, your testimony. You want me to help you bring him down. I want you to help bring them all down, Dante said. Cobb. The Calabrese family. Every corrupt cop who's been covering for them. But that starts with keeping you alive. Maritza looked out at the lake. At the city sprawling beyond the glass. She was trapped. But for the first time since she'd watched Luis die, she didn't feel powerless. Okay, she said quietly. I'll stay. 3 days passed in the penthouse, and Maritza began to understand that Dante Compton's world operated by rules she'd never imagined. She'd expected a crime lord's headquarters to feel dangerous, volatile, filled with the kind of casual violence she'd seen in movies. Instead, it felt more like a corporation. People came and went on schedules. Meetings happened in the conference room with laptops and financial projections. The men who'd stormed the warehouse now wore suits and answered phones with professional courtesy. Dante himself was a study in contradictions. He left for meetings every morning at 8, returned by 6, and spent his evenings reviewing documents in his home office. He was polite to his staff, tipped generously when food was delivered, and once spent 20 minutes on the phone, talking someone's grandmother through, resetting her email password because she'd called the wrong number. It was deeply unsettling. On the third night, Maritza found herself unable to sleep. She wandered through the penthouse, eventually ending up outside Dante's office. The door was cracked open, warm light spilling into the hallway. She knocked softly. "Come in," Dante said without looking up from his laptop. Maritza stepped inside. The office was smaller than she'd expected, lined with bookshelves and filing cabinets. Dante sat behind a mahogany desk, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked tired. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I keep seeing Luis," Maritza admitted. "The way he fell, the blood." Dante closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. "That doesn't go away. You learn to live with it, but it doesn't go away. How many people have you seen die? Too many." He studied her for a moment. "You're wondering what kind of man I am. What kind of monster runs an empire built on crime?" Maritza didn't deny it. Dante stood and walked to one of the filing cabinets. He unlocked it and pulled out a thick folder, setting it on the desk between them. "This is who I am," he said, opening it. Maritza looked down. The folder was filled with photographs, police reports, and handwritten notes. She recognized faces from news reports, victims of unsolved murders, missing persons who'd never been found. 7 people, Dante said. All killed by Detective Sidney Cobb over the past 3 years. All eliminated because they threatened the Calabrese family's operations. Maritza's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. A college student who'd witnessed a drug deal. A bartender who'd overheard too much. A paralegal who'd found the wrong file. Each one had a police report that explained away their death with convenient lies. "Why do you have all this?" she asked. "Because I've been trying to stop him," Dante said. "The Calabrese family operates without rules. They traffic drugs through schools. They exploit women. They kill civilians without hesitation. I've spent 5 years systematically dismantling their operations, but Cobb kept cleaning up their messes before I could gather evidence. You're saying you're the good guy?" Maritza's voice carried an edge of disbelief. "I'm saying I'm the necessary guy." Dante sat on the edge of his desk. "I control organized crime in this city, because if I don't, people like the Calabreses do. And they don't have rules." "What rules?" Maritza challenged. "No civilian casualties. No drug trafficking in schools or residential neighborhoods. No human exploitation. No killing witnesses." He paused. "I'm not a good man, Maritza, but I'm a contained evil. I keep the chaos from spreading." Maritza stared at the files. "These families, did they come to you?" "Some did. Some I found." Dante's voice softened. "A mother whose daughter disappeared after testifying. A brother who knew his sister didn't commit suicide. They had nowhere else to go. The police couldn't help them because the police were the ones responsible." He pulled out another folder, thinner than the first. Inside were contact logs, financial records, recorded phone calls. "I've been building a case against Cobb for 2 years, Dante said. "But every piece of evidence I gathered was circumstantial. Every witness disappeared or recanted. I needed someone with credibility, someone who saw him kill and lived to testify." Understanding dawned on Maritza. "That's why you answered my text." "That's why I answered your text," Dante confirmed. "And that's why the Calabrese family will come for you. You're not just a witness to a single murder. You're the thread that unravels their entire network." Maritza looked at the photographs of the victims again. 7 people. 7 families destroyed. And Cobb was still wearing his badge. Still coaching basketball. Still bringing donuts to hospitals. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we build a case they can't ignore. Federal prosecutors, FBI involvement. Evidence so overwhelming that even Cobb's friends can't make it disappear." Dante's eyes met hers. "But that takes time. And the Calabreses won't wait. They're coming for me. They're already looking." Dante closed the folders. "But they won't find you here. And when they make their move, we'll be ready." Maritza stood, exhaustion finally settling into her bones. She paused at the door. "Why do you really do this?" she asked. "What made you become the necessary evil?" Dante's expression shifted, something raw flickering across his face before the mask of control returned. "I had a sister," he said quietly. "She called me one night asking for help. I was too busy, too important. I told her to handle it herself." He didn't finish the story. He didn't need to. Maritza understood. "I'm sorry," she said. Dante nodded once, then turned back to his laptop. The conversation was over. Sidney Cobb sat across from Vincent Calabrese in a private room at Gino's, a restaurant that hadn't served actual customers in 15 years. The dining room was a front. The real business happened in the back, where men made deals that shaped the city's underworld. Vincent was in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a suit that cost more than Cobb's car. He swirled bourbon in a crystal glass and studied Cobb with the detached interest of a man evaluating livestock. "You look terrible, detective," Vincent said. "Broken nose, dislocated shoulder. I heard you got embarrassed by the architect." Cobb's jaw tightened. The bandages on his face still throbbed. "He has the nurse. The one who saw me deal with your Luis problem." "My Luis problem," Vincent repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "The problem you created by leaving a witness alive. I had it handled until you didn't." Vincent set down his glass. "Now Dante Compton has a credible witness who can connect me to 7 murders. Do you understand what that means? It means decades of careful work are at risk, because you got sloppy." Cobb leaned forward, desperation bleeding into his voice. "I can fix this. I know where Compton operates. I can give you intelligence on his warehouses, his supply routes, his security protocols. Everything you need to hit him where it hurts. In exchange for what?" "Get me the nurse," Cobb said. "Dead. I don't care how. But she can't testify." Vincent studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. Cold and predatory. "You're offering to betray the man who owns half this city just to save your own skin. I'm offering you a chance to eliminate your biggest competitor and your biggest threat in one move," Cobb countered. "Compton thinks he's untouchable in that penthouse fortress, but I can give you the security gaps, the timing, everything you need." Vincent picked up his phone and made a call. "Gather the captains. Tell them we're mobilizing." He hung up and looked back at Cobb. "You deliver intelligence by tomorrow night. We'll handle the rest." "And the nurse?" "Dead by the end of the week," Vincent promised. "Along with anyone who tries to protect her." Dante's phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. He answered immediately. "Talk. We've got chatter," Matteo said, his voice tight. "Multiple sources. The Calabreses are mobilizing. They're calling in outside contractors, serious operators. Whatever they're planning, it's big." Dante was already out of bed, pulling on clothes. "How big?" "Full assault. They're talking about hitting the building." "Our building." Dante's blood went cold. The penthouse was fortified, but no fortress was impregnable if someone was willing to pay enough for the breach. Triple security on all access points. Activate the secondary protocols. And wake Maritza. She needs to know what's coming. 5 minutes later, Dante knocked on Maritza's bedroom door. She opened it immediately, already dressed, eyes alert with fear. "What's happening?" "The Calabrese family is coming," Dante said. "We have maybe 24 hours before they move." Maritza's face went pale, but she didn't panic. "What do we do?" Dante had been asking himself the same question for the past 3 hours. He'd run through every scenario, every tactical option. There was only one play that guaranteed her survival. "I have a plane waiting at a private airfield," he said. "It can have you in Vancouver in 4 hours. I have contacts there, people who can set you up with a new identity, a new life. You'll be safe." Maritza stared at him. "You want me to run? I want you to survive," Dante said. "If they breach this building, they won't stop until you're dead. This isn't your war. You're wrong." Maritza's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "This became my war the moment I watched Luis die. The moment I saw Cobb murder an innocent man and smile about it. Maritza, how many more people will he kill if I disappear?" she demanded. "How many more witnesses will die because I was too scared to stay?" "You saw the files," Dante said, his tone sharpening. "You know what these people do. They won't just kill you. They'll make it hurt. They'll make it last. Then I guess you better make sure they don't get to me." Maritza crossed her arms. "I'm not running, Dante. Those 7 victims in your files, they deserve justice. Luis deserved justice. And I'm the only person who can give it to them." Dante recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same expression he'd seen in the mirror 5 years ago, when he decided to stop being afraid and start being dangerous. "You understand what you're choosing," he said. "Once the Calabreses move, There's no going back. You'll be in this fight until the end. I understand. Maritza stepped closer. And I'm choosing to stand. Not because I trust you completely. Not because I think you're a good man, but because running means letting Cobb win. And I can't do that. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Dante nodded. Then we prepare. If they want a war, we'll give them one they won't survive. Maritza's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed firm. What do you need me to do? Stay alive, Dante said. Everything else, I'll handle. But as he walked back to his office to coordinate defenses, Dante knew the truth. The Calabreses were coming with everything they had. And this time, staying alive might not be enough. The lights went out at 3:47 a.m. Maritza was in the living room when the penthouse plunged into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in dim red. Then, 3 seconds later, even that died. Complete darkness. Matteo. Dante's voice cut through the silence, sharp and controlled. Report. Power's cut at the main junction, Matteo replied from somewhere nearby. Backup generators should be. Silence. The generators never engaged. They sabotaged the backups, Dante said. His hand found Maritza's arm in the darkness. Stay behind me. The first explosion came from the parking garage, 30 floors below. The building shuddered. Glass rattled in the windows. They're breaching, Matteo said into his radio. All units, defensive positions, lock down the stairwells. Gunfire erupted from below automatic weapons, the staccato rhythm echoing up through the building's skeleton. Maritza's medical training kicked in automatically, cataloging the sounds. 9mm, maybe 5.56 rifles. Multiple shooters. Dante pulled her toward the hallway. My office. Now. They moved through the darkness, Dante navigating by memory. Behind them, Maritza heard Matteo coordinating the defense, his voice calm despite the chaos. Stairwell C is compromised. Fall back to 35. Use the choke point. More gunfire. Closer now. They reached Dante's office, just as the emergency lights flickered back on someone had restored partial power. Dante locked the door. A heavy steel-reinforced barrier that looked like wood, but wasn't. How many men do you have? Maritza asked. 12 in the building. Maybe 8 still standing. Dante moved to a hidden panel in the wall and pulled out weapons. 2 handguns, a rifle, spare magazines. They hit us with at least 30. The building shook again. Another explosion. This one higher. Maybe 20th floor. Dante's radio crackled. Boss, they're pushing stairwell B. We can't hold. Gunfire drowned out the rest. Dante grabbed the rifle and moved toward the door. Stay in here. Don't open this for anyone except me or Matteo. Wait. The office door exploded inward. Not from outside. From a shaped charge someone had planted during the blackout. Dante was thrown backward by the blast, slamming into his desk. 3 men in tactical gear flooded through the smoking doorway, rifles raised. Dante fired from the ground, dropping the first man. The second returned fire. Maritza saw the muzzle flash, heard Dante grunt, watched him stumble. Then Matteo was there, appearing from the hallway, his weapon barking 3 times in rapid succession. The remaining 2 attackers went down. Boss! Matteo moved to Dante, who was clutching his side, blood spreading between his fingers. I'm fine, Dante said through gritted teeth. Seal that entry point. You're shot, Maritza said, her nurse's training overriding her terror. She dropped to her knees beside him. Let me see. Dante tried to wave her off, but she was already pulling his hand away. The wound was high on his left side, just below the ribs. Entry wound, no exit. The bullet was still inside. Matteo, I need supplies, Maritza said, her voice shifting into the clinical tone she used in the ER. First aid kit, clean towels, anything you have. Matteo hesitated, looking between them and the compromised doorway. Do it, Dante ordered. Drag me behind the desk and get her what she needs. Matteo and Maritza pulled Dante behind the heavy mahogany desk as another burst of gunfire echoed from the stairwell. Matteo disappeared and returned 30 seconds later with a trauma kit and an armful of clean linens. They're on 42, Matteo said. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they breach this floor. Then buy me 5 minutes, Maritza said, already tearing open the trauma kit. Matteo nodded and moved to the doorway, taking up a defensive position. Maritza's hands were steady now, muscle memory taking over. She'd treated gunshot wounds in the ER dozens of times. This was no different, except the patient was the only thing standing between her and the men trying to kill her. "This is going to hurt," she said to Dante. "Everything hurts," he replied, his voice tight with pain. She packed the wound with gauze, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. The bullet had missed major organs, but it was lodged against something, maybe a rib. Moving it would require surgery she couldn't perform here. "I can stabilize you, but you need a hospital," Maritza said. "Not an option." Dante's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes were still sharp. "How long can you keep me functional? Depends on how much blood you lose. Then work fast." Gunfire erupted right outside the office. Matteo returned fire, his rifle lighting up the darkness in strobing flashes. "They're here," he shouted. Maritza wrapped pressure bandages around Dante's torso, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She'd done this 100 times. Save the life in front of you. Worry about everything else later. Dante gripped his rifle with his good hand. "Can I move?" "You can move," Maritza said. "But if that wound reopens, if they get through that door, reopening wounds won't matter." Dante pushed himself up, using the desk for support. His face was gray, but he was standing. Matteo emptied his magazine and ducked back behind cover. "I count 8, maybe 10. We're outnumbered." Dante looked at Maritza. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw something close to fear in his eyes. Not for himself. For her. "Whatever happens," he said, "you stay behind this desk. You understand?" Maritza nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside the office, the shadows moved closer. The gunfire had stopped. That was somehow worse than the chaos. The silence meant they were regrouping, coordinating, preparing for the final push. Maritza could hear boots on the floor below, voices speaking in clipped tones. Matteo had fallen back into the office, bleeding from a shoulder wound. 3 of Dante's men held the stairwell, but they were running out of ammunition. The math was brutal and simple. They had minutes before the Calabrese enforcers overwhelmed them. Dante leaned against the desk, his face chalk white, his breathing shallow. The bandages Maritza had applied were already soaked through with blood. He needed surgery. He needed a hospital. He needed things she couldn't give him. "Matteo," Dante said, his voice strained. "The safe room. Can we reach it?" "They're between us and the access point," Matteo replied. "We'd have to go through them. Then we make a stand here." Dante checked his rifle. 4 rounds left. "We hold until..." "Until what?" Maritza interrupted. "Until we're all dead? Until they execute us the way Cobb executed Luis?" Dante looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw resignation. He'd already accepted that this was how it ended, fighting to the last bullet, taking as many of them down as possible before the inevitable. But Maritza hadn't survived the parking garage, the warehouse, and this siege just to die in a penthouse office. She grabbed Dante's secure phone from his pocket. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Changing the ending." Maritza's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. She dialed 911, but not for emergency services. She asked for a transfer. "Federal Bureau of Investigation tip line." A bored voice answered. "My name is Maritza Gordon," she said, her words tumbling out fast. "I'm a nurse at Chicago Memorial Hospital. 4 days ago, I witnessed Detective Sidney Cobb of the Chicago PD execute an unarmed man named Luis Reyes in the hospital parking garage. He killed Luis to prevent him from testifying against the Calabrese crime family." Silence on the other end. Then, "Ma'am, can you repeat that?" "I'm being held at gunpoint right now by the Calabrese family at 1200 Lakeshore Drive, Penthouse 47. They're trying to kill me to prevent my testimony. Detective Sidney Cobb has murdered at least 7 witnesses over the past 3 years. I have evidence. I have testimony. And if you don't send federal agents to this location in the next 5 minutes, I'll be the 8th victim. Ma'am, stay on the line." "I can't stay on the line. They're coming through the door." Maritza looked at Dante, whose expression had shifted from resignation to something like hope. "Send every agent you have. Send them now, and tell them to bring news cameras. I want the whole city to know what Sidney Cobb really is." She hung up. "You just painted a federal target on this building," Matteo said, staring at her. "I painted a federal witness protection on me," Maritza corrected. "The Calabreses can't execute a federal witness with FBI agents listening to the 911 dispatch. They can't breach this office with news helicopters on the way. And they sure as hell can't disappear me without creating an investigation that will expose everyone involved. Dante's eyes locked onto hers. They'll retreat. They'll have to, Maritza said, unless they want to explain to federal prosecutors why they're shooting at a witness who just testified about police corruption. As if on cue, someone shouted from the hallway. Pull back. Federal dispatch just went active on this address. Move. Now. The sound of retreating footsteps echoed through the building. Orders barked in urgent voices. The Calabrese enforcers were abandoning the assault. Matteo moved to the doorway carefully, rifle raised, then lowered it. They're running. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Not just a few, dozens. The entire city's emergency response descending on the building. Maritza turned back to Dante, who was still bleeding, still braced against the desk. She grabbed the trauma kit and knelt beside him. I need you to lie down, she said. That bullet isn't coming out without proper surgery, but I can close the wound enough to get you stable. The FBI is coming, Dante said. When they get here, they'll arrest everyone in this building, including me. Then you better have a good lawyer. Maritza threaded a suture needle with steady hands. Because I didn't save your life just so you could bleed out worrying about federal charges. Dante watched her work, his expression unreadable. You know what you've done. By testifying, by going on record, there's no going back now. You'll be in witness protection. Your life, everything you knew, gone. Good, Maritza said, her hands moving with practiced precision as she began closing the wound. Because the life I knew included watching innocent people die while corrupt cops brought donuts to my hospital. I'd rather burn that whole world down than go back to pretending it was normal. She tied off the first suture. Dante grimaced but didn't make a sound. You're asking for a war, he said quietly. No. Maritza looked up from her work, her eyes fierce. I'm ending one. Cobb, the Calabreses. Every dirty cop who's been covering for them, they're done. And I'm going to make sure the whole city knows it. The sirens were closer now. Red and blue lights began flashing through the windows, painting the office in alternating colors. I'm not running, Maritza continued, tying off another suture. I'm not disappearing into witness protection and pretending this never happened. I'm staying. I'm testifying. And we're burning this whole thing down together. Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, there was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You're more dangerous than I thought. I'm a nurse, Maritza said, finishing the final suture. I save lives. But sometimes, saving lives means destroying the things that are killing people. She cut the thread and pressed a clean bandage over the wound. Dante's color was already improving, his breathing steadier, the sound of boots on the stairs controlled, official. Federal agents sweeping the building. Matteo moved to the doorway, hands raised, weapon on the ground. Federal agents entering. Maritza helped Dante to his feet as a team of FBI agents flooded into the office, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. Maritza Gordon? One of them asked. That's me, she said, not letting go of Dante's arm. And I have a lot to tell you. As they were separated, Maritza escorted to safety. Dante and his men detained for questioning, she looked back at him one final time. He nodded once. A silent acknowledgement. An unspoken promise. 6 months later, the courtroom was packed. Every seat filled, cameras positioned at the back, reporters elbow to elbow in the gallery. Maritza sat in the witness box, her hands folded calmly in her lap, wearing a navy suit that Agent Torres had helped her pick out. Sidney Cobb sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his lawyer beside him. The detective who'd once brought donuts to nurses now faced 17 federal charges, including murder, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. The families of his 7 victims sat in the front row. Maritza had made sure of it. Miss Gordon, the prosecutor said, approaching the witness stand. Can you tell the court what you witnessed on the night of September 15th in the parking garage of Chicago Memorial Hospital? Maritza's voice was steady, clear, unwavering. I saw Detective Sidney Cobb execute Luis Reyes with a single gunshot to the chest. Luis was begging for his life. He mentioned his 3-year-old daughter. Detective Cobb shot him anyway. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of someone crying softly in the front row, Luis's widow. Cobb's lawyer stood. Objection, Your Honor. The witness. Save it for cross-examination, counselor. the judge said sharply. Maritza continued. For 3 hours, she laid out everything. The warehouse, the gun to her head, the mistyped text that saved her life, Dante's rescue, the files documenting years of murders that Cobb had covered up. When she finished, the prosecutor turned to the jury. That's all, Your Honor. Cobb's lawyer approached for cross-examination, but his questions were desperate, grasping. Maritza didn't waver. Didn't break. She'd faced worse than hostile questions. The verdict came 4 days later. Guilty. On all counts. Maritza watched from the gallery as Cobb was led away in handcuffs. His face pale, his arrogance finally shattered. The families of his victims wept not from grief this time, but from relief, from vindication. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her, but federal marshals kept them back. Agent Torres appeared at Maritza's elbow. There's someone who wants to see you, Torres said quietly. He's been cooperating with our investigation. His testimony helped us dismantle the Calabrese family's operations. The DA agreed to a deal. Maritza knew who it was before Torres said the name. They met in a private room in the federal building. Dante stood near the window, wearing a suit but no tie, looking thinner than she remembered but alive. Recovering. You testified, he said when she entered. I told you I would. Maritza closed the door behind her. I heard you cooperated. Gave them everything on the Calabrese network. Seemed fair, Dante replied. You burned down one corrupt empire. I figured I'd help burn down another. They stood in silence for a moment. Two people who'd survived a war together. What happens now? Maritza asked. For you? House arrest, monitoring, community service. Dante smiled slightly. Apparently, the FBI thinks I'm more useful as a consultant on organized crime than a prisoner. Immunity in exchange for information. And your businesses? Being restructured, legitimized. Turns out I'm decent at running legal operations too. He paused. What about you? Witness protection. Maritza shook her head. I turned it down. The Calabrese family is finished. Cobb is in prison. The people who wanted me dead are either locked up or cooperating to avoid life sentences. She smiled. I'm going back to nursing. Different hospital. Same work. Saving lives. You always were good at that. Maritza moved closer. I got a letter last week. From Luis Reyes' widow. She thanked me for giving her daughter closure. For making sure the man who killed her father faced justice. Dante's expression softened. That's what this was all about. That's what it's always been about. Maritza extended her hand. Thank you, Dante. For answering a wrong number from a terrified stranger. He took her hand, holding it firmly. Thank you for refusing to run. For choosing to fight. They stood like that for a moment. A crime lord turned informant, and a nurse who'd brought down an empire of corruption, with nothing but her testimony and her courage. Take care of yourself, Maritza Gordon, Dante said. You too, architect. 1 year later, Maritza finished her shift at Northwestern Memorial at midnight. The ER had been chaos. 3 car accidents, a stabbing, 2 cardiac arrests. Her feet ached, her scrubs were stained, and she was exhausted. She loved it. As she walked to her car in the parking garage, she'd gotten over her fear months ago, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Her heart skipped, old instincts flaring. Then she opened it. Unknown. Saw the news. Cobb's appeal was denied. Life without parole. Thought you'd want to know. Maritza smiled and typed back. Maritza. Good. The right ending. Unknown. The right fight. D. She deleted the message, got in her car, and drove home through the Chicago night. The city lights glittered around her, beautiful and brutal, and hers. She'd survived. She'd testified. She'd won. And somewhere in this same city, 7 families could finally rest, knowing justice had been served. Luis Reyes' daughter would grow up knowing her father's death hadn't been forgotten, hadn't been covered up, hadn't been in vain. Maritza Gordon, nurse, witness, survivor, pulled into her apartment complex and looked up at the stars barely visible through the light pollution. She'd lost her old life, but she'd gained something more valuable. The truth, justice, peace, and the unshakable certainty that when faced with evil, she'd chosen to stand and fight rather than run and hide. That was worth everything.